Everything is falling apart. Now, you might think I'm talking about the environmental crisis facing our planet, or it could be that I'm talking about the political situation in the world, wars and violence and polarization. Or maybe you assume I mean social norms and intact families and public highways. Whatever your speculation, I hate to disappoint you. But what I'm actually complaining about is my house. Everything we own is falling apart. In the last few weeks alone, we have had to replace a washing machine, a dishwasher, a septic line, and even a fuel line in the truck because it was apparently jealous of all the attention the house was getting. Every time I so much as look at an appliance now, I think grimly, the end is near. Although come to think of it, all those other things, true as well. Things really are falling apart, or at least it feels that way, which makes all of my household woes seem pretty petty indeed. So it seems fitting that the lesson for today is from Mark 13, affectionately referred to by biblical scholars as the little apocalypse. In this chapter, Jesus and his followers are in Jerusalem at the temple, which was magnificent. People used to travel from all over just to see that temple, which had gotten a serious facelift under the reign of King Herod the Great. Nice flex, Herod. People loved it. Jesus' disciples, mostly country folk who were easily impressed by the grandeur of the big city, loved it too. And as they left the temple, they craned their necks to get a better view, saying, "Teacher, look, what awesome stones and buildings." Jesus responded, "Do you see those enormous buildings? Not even one stone will be left upon another. All will be demolished." Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives across from the temple. Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What sign will show that all of these things are about to come to an end?" Jesus said, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many people will come in my name saying, 'I'm the one.' They will deceive many people. When you hear of wars and reports of wars, don't be alarmed. These things must happen, but it isn't the end yet. Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other, and there will be earthquakes and famines in all sorts of places. These things are just the beginning of the sufferings associated with the end." And all because someone said the temple was amazing. Wow. Traveling with Jesus. What a downer. I don't think they even got one good selfie before he started in with this end of the world stuff. What gives? Why was he in such a bad mood? Were things falling apart in Jesus' life too? Well, they were about to. This incident, you see, took place on his last trip to Jerusalem, just days before his arrest and crucifixion. He had to know that everything was about to come crashing down. But I'm not sure that was his only concern. You see, right before they stepped out into the sunshine to admire the stonework of that marvelous temple, they had been inside the jewel-encrusted place, admiring the gold, the elegant woodwork, the splendor of it all. His disciples were awestruck. But while they were looking around at the finery, Jesus noticed something that they may have overlooked. A poor widow who came in to make her offering. She may have gotten lost in the crowd of well-dressed, wealthy people who made a great show of dropping in many coins, but Jesus noticed her humble approach as she dropped in just 2 small coins. Not much, but all she had to live on. It was her own personal end-of-the-world moment, a low-budget offering with high stakes for her. Would her loving God hear her prayer? Certainly. But would the community of faith provide the answer? According to Jesus, certainly not. He had just criticized the religious leaders for devouring widows' houses, exploiting the most vulnerable among them so that they could live well. Maybe this corrupt system is what needed to be torn down so something better could be built in its place. God didn't need a temple to live in anyway, but God did require, according to the prophet Micah, that the faithful commit themselves to justice, kindness, and humility on their walk of faith. Jesus was not seeing this in the temple. If it was destroyed, would it really be the end of the world? Well, it felt that way to his disciples, who immediately pelted him with questions. When? How will we know? What will be the sign of this impending disaster? Jesus evaded those questions. Either he didn't know, or that wasn't the point. He didn't seem interested in speculating on exactly when or how the temple would be destroyed. What did interest him was how the disciples would continue in the aftermath of the devastation. He knew that times of crisis often lead to corrupt people making a power grab, so he counseled his disciples to watch out, that no one deceives you. He said, many people will come in my name saying, I'm the one, and they will deceive many people. And he warned them that there would be scary times, wars, natural disasters, famines. All of these things would happen before the end. Now let us understand that Jesus was talking about the 40 years between the actual time, which was the year 30, and the destruction of the temple, which wouldn't happen until 70. In that time, there were wars, disasters, and famines. Pompeii was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Jesus' own people would revolt against Rome and lose big time, and the Roman army would destroy the temple to teach them not to mess with Rome. And we all know that war and natural disaster both lead to famine. So Jesus was not wrong in his prediction. Now, if you go ahead and read all of Mark's 13th chapter, have fun. He talks about the ways in which his own followers will be persecuted, and it gets pretty dark. But please know that this is a form of writing called apocalyptic literature. All this talk of wars, earthquakes, famines, Jesus was using a style of rhetoric well known in his time, modeled after a literary genre that the original readers of Mark would have immediately recognized. What they knew that we might not readily know is that apocalyptic literature is not meant to be taken literally. Rather, it's written almost poetically, using unsettling language and images to assure people of faith to trust in God even in the hardest times. And that is what Jesus does in this passage. He lists all sorts of terrible, awful things that would bring any of us to our knees, and concludes the whole passage with this instruction: what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. Keep awake? Well, I suppose so, because who could possibly get a wink of sleep after hearing that all they hold dear, their temple, and maybe even their lives, will be in grave peril in years to come? I've personally had some sleepless nights just wondering how we'll ever pay for a new heater at the church when the old one gives up the ghost, and that's nothing compared to what was on Jesus' disciples' minds. But all of this can be distilled to one clear message: no matter what happens, stay alert and focused on your task. For Jesus came not to build fine temples or gain great power, but to teach his followers how to live in service of others. And come what may, the destruction of their temple, even threats against their lives, they were to stay the course and continue serving others as he had taught them. And they did. In the years to come, both before and after the destruction of the temple, Jesus' disciples continued the work of caring for the vulnerable. Remember that widow who gave her last 2 coins to the temple treasury and then walked away to face her fate? Jesus' followers opened their hearts, doors, and tables to people like her. They fed the widows, the orphans, and anyone else who was suffering in those cruel times when at least 80% of non-Roman citizens lived in grinding poverty. Theirs was a spiritual revolution, a wonderful new thing being born that would survive long after the temple itself had been turned into a pile of rubble. And that is the spiritual legacy that we have inherited. As modern-day followers of Jesus, we too are resilient, but only when we stay awake and focus on our mission. It is easy to succumb to despair. Everywhere we look, churches are closing, attendance is down, the families have other priorities. Where are the kids? I know, I feel it too. Will the church survive this post-Christendom era when attending church has fallen out of favor? I don't know. But I do know that God's ongoing work in the world is not finished and will never be finished. Ours is a God who does not concede defeat, even to death by crucifixion. Ours is a story of resurrection, of new life, of continued purpose, of staying awake and keeping the mission alive, which we will one way or another. Now, just this week, I heard 2 amazing stories. One about a woman who has taken to inviting her neighbors to regular dinners at her home, where she has installed a 20-person table in the backyard. On the fence is a big sign with letters spelling love. People gather there so often that they begin to know each other well and care about each other's lives. Politics are never discussed, thanks be to God. All are welcome, and when a neighbor called one day to say, "Hey, my Christmas plans fell through, are you accepting orphans?" the answer was yes. And other neighbors heard the invitation, and about a dozen extras showed up. They sat at that big table enjoying potluck Christmas and fellowship with strangers, and one man who had come alone stared at the love letters on the fence, and he began to cry. "That is what I feel here," he said. Hearing that story, I teared up too, and I thought, that's what I feel in church. I wish people knew how it could be. The second story I heard was about an actual church called Provisions UMC in Virginia. They have no building, no Sunday worship, no sermon. What they do have is a community cafe where chefs cook beautiful food for anyone who wants to share a meal, and people are welcome to stay as long as they want or need. There are people to help you navigate difficult paperwork, apply for jobs, or drive you to appointments. Many of the people who show up live on the margins of society, and they've never had the luxury of having someone they can call for help until they discovered Provisions United Methodist, where they were welcomed into a community of care. It's exciting ministry, and even without a real building or an altar or a Sunday sermon, it is church. In a time of despair, that community of faith is offering a message of hope to the downtrodden, because Jesus said, "Feed my sheep," and he also said, "Tend my sheep," so they do both. I share these stories because they give me hope on days when I wonder, will there even be churches in 20, 30, 40 years? I don't know if there will be church buildings or if those buildings will still be called churches, but I am absolutely certain that God's work in the world will still continue. There's this little girl at children's choir who told me a few weeks ago, "When I grow up, I want to work here." And I thought, yeah, maybe she'll grow up to be a pastor. That could happen. But then this week she told me her new idea. "When I grow up, I want to live here. I think this will be my house. The bedrooms will be downstairs, and upstairs it'll be a big singing room, and the sanctuary, that'll be another singing room, and kind of a living room too for people to be." I thought to myself, maybe that is the church of the future. Just a place for people to be, to sing, to share life, to break bread. Is that not the kingdom of God Jesus was always trying to get his disciples to understand? Maybe all it takes is a little child to lead us. It turns out that maybe what we consider the end of the world is just the beginning of something new, because temples will rise and fall, the powerful will live and die. But what is eternal is God's love for us and God's ongoing work in which we have the privilege of participating for the precious time allotted us. And then we pass the torch to the next generation. What matters is not how it happens or where, as long as the love of Jesus continues to be shared in this world so beloved to God, all shall be well, world without end. Before I end my reflection, I would like to bless you with these words from Steve Garnes Holmes, inspired by today's gospel reading. Steve writes, "This is not a metaphor. The temple will be destroyed. What we love, what we thought permanent, will be thrown down. Night descends. Now in the darkness, the lights matter. Jesus is not preparing us to picnic in happy suburbs. He is training us to live with grace in a troubled city, to live with kindness and courage amid turmoil and loss. This brokenness is the world in which mercy matters. When things fall apart, when chaos and fracture surround us, we can stay whole. When fear and anger rule, we can stay faithful to love. When the temple comes down, don't panic. Stay kind. Empire will come and plunder, but they can't take the light in you. They can't take your courage to choose. They can't take your commitment to live with grace. No one can take the beloved from you. That tender, strong presence is in you to stay. Despite what falls around us, tend to what rises within